Good evening, everyone. I'm Sandee from the Farmington Valley VNA, and I have a group of friends that have assembled. I'm sorry?
Louder.
Oh, louder, okay. I have a group of friends that have come together, and we all have a specialty. Some of us sooner and some of us later, as we say, and these are things that are all important to all of us. In different times of our life, we're going to have an attorney that will speak to you. We have someone that will help you with your finances. We have someone that will help you declutter your home and organize your home for perhaps a move in the far distant future or the near future. We have someone that is a patient advocate, and we have someone that will help us think about pre-planning for our final destination. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we do at the Farmington Valley VNA, and then we'll just move right on down, and we'll each take a few minutes to give you some information. And then after the filming, we have decided that we will take a few questions and answers. We will try to get everyone out by about 7 o'clock. I know it gets dark sooner and people want to be home, so we will see that we can accomplish that. Well, I think many of you have used the Farmington Valley VNA, perhaps for some home care. Maybe you've used us for our hospice. Maybe you've been to some of our educational programs. But we do a lot of things that I don't think that folks have any idea. We can work with you on physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. Obviously, the doctor will write an order for you to have that, and that would be covered by your insurance. So there are a lot of things that we can do. We can be in touch with your physician. Many people say, well, I don't know if the doctor will want you to come in. Well, the doctor is probably recommending that you get some help at home. Lots of times people don't know this, but if you're in assisted living or in a nursing home, we can likewise be of service to you in those situations, especially with hospice care. And we have done programs on hospice. How many of you folks out there understand what hospice is all about, and that it's not just for the last few hours for yourself or for your loved one? It's a process, and we like to be there to share the process with you, and it really does help the family. So, and other people have us come in because of their chronic illnesses. Sometimes if they have a colostomy and need some training with that type of situation, we can be there to do that also. So I think tomorrow we are having our wellness fair upstairs. And if you have a moment tomorrow between 9:30 and 11:30, we will be doing the wellness fair, and we'll have our flu clinic, we will have our pneumonia clinic, and you have an opportunity to sign up if you would like to get your shingles shot. You cannot do that tomorrow. It has to be a frozen vaccine, so we will have to wait until you can sign up, and then we can arrange for a time and place for that. Many physicians do not have a freezer, so they cannot keep the vaccine frozen. So, and most insurance companies now are looking at that and paying for it as preventive care, as opposed to it being a very expensive shot. So let me please suggest, if you haven't had a shingles shot, please do. I think all of us have had chicken pox. Very, very important to have that. So I'm going to pass the microphone on to Regina, and she's going to tell you a little bit about her program.
Hi. Great to be here. It's great to see all these wonderful faces. My name is Regina Sanchez. I am a professional organizer and a certified photo and home movie organizer. I'll tell you a little bit about that towards the end. But what my services offer is I go into people's homes and I help them declutter. And in the senior population, I have a service that I call right sizing. And I help seniors right size into the next season of life. I use the word right size as opposed to downsize because I think it has a more positive definition. As we're downsizing, people kind of feel sad and feel like they're losing something. But right sizing means that if it's time to go through your home and declutter, or even if it's time to make a move to an assisted living or a senior living facility, that will right-size you into that new season and into that next place of a home for you. But there are, the option to have to move isn't always, necessary. As you will see, there are many services that you could do to stay in your home. Things like, the VNA and people like, Sharon, who you hear about, and services that Phil offer, and even myself. But there's a lot of services out there now for people to stay in their home if they choose to. But sometimes, physically, you can, if you have physical situations that need medical care, that's out there. But sometimes the home becomes difficult to stay in. And so, one of the questions I ask people is, that home that was once your castle, has it now become a prison? Because does the roof need to be replaced? Is the furnace going? Does the house need to be painted? Is it accessible and safe, which is really the most important thing you need to consider in your home. Do you have trouble walking, and are the bedrooms upstairs, and is the washer and dryer in the basement? So sometimes our home and the place that we spent years in ends up feeling a little more like a prison to us. And it's time to think about and maybe consider, making a move to an assisted living or a senior living facility. And then you have people like Tracy, who helps that transition, that helps you find those places. But I highly, encourage individuals to really go through the process of decluttering, their home and looking at your belongings and what you would like to happen. And I really say, don't leave it for your children. Because it becomes a big burden for them. Most of our children are, both working with children of their own, raising families or whatever. And to have their parents pass on and have to go into now their home that they've been into for 30, 40, 50 years or whatever is a very overwhelming and daunting process. So what happens a lot of times is a company called 1-800-GOT-JUNK gets called, the truck comes, and they just sort of empty the house. And a lot of times there could be precious belongings that, that get sent in the junk truck. So it's really, a good idea to go through your home and think about your belongings and, certain precious items that you might want to pass on to, family members. Sometimes families that may have, let's say you have an attic full of wonderful belongings or basements with belongings, invite the grandkids to come over and have a scavenger hunt. And tell them they can, take, whatever items they find throughout the scavenger hunt, and they have to take
hide
them.
all those naughty pictures.
But it's really, it's a worthwhile, investment to take that time and go through your belongings and make those decisions. On what you want to do, and even declutter. Sometimes, you go. Individuals, like I was helping somebody this weekend who had, oh my gosh, I think we went through 100 magazines, and so did she really need those? No, and we fortunately decluttered them. But over the years, we just collect things, and then what happens is, we raise our family in these homes, and then the kids move on, and now we've got an empty bedroom. So that becomes a storage room. And then the next child leaves and their bedroom is empty and that becomes a storage room. So before you know it, this big house that you were in or whatever size, it becomes a closet of all, your belongings. So
And now you're on the show hoarding.
well, not always to that magnitude, but, and it's a daunting process, and that's why there are people like myself called professional organizers, and we are all over the world. In every country, there are organizers. It's a very, a big service that we offer. So that's something to think about in your homes and looking it over. And if it feels daunting, that's where people like myself come in and we help you with that process. We never tell you to throw something away, but we help you think through the process, or give something away, whatever. But we help you think through the process of what to hold on to and maybe what to turn over. The last thing I just want to talk to you about, which is dear, dear, dear to my heart, is we all, as we get older, we meet with our estate lawyers and we decide our estates and we write up our wills and we decide who we're going to leave the money to and how we're going to divvy that up and our precious belongings. But a lot of times we forget a very important part of something to leave, and that's ourselves. And we all have a part of ourself that's precious and important to leave to our family. So one of the things I work with people, individuals, whether you be young or old, is we go through your photos and we help tell your story. And we create a legacy, whether it's a slideshow, whether it's a memory book, whether it's a movie. But don't, leave this earth without telling your story. And the stories don't always have to be wonderful. They could be hard times. They could be, difficult times that you may went through, maybe without a job for a while, and how the family got through it. Because it's important, because stories are what makes a family. And we all want to hear the stories, and we all want to know how Grandma and Grandpa made it. My grandmother came to live with me when I was with my family when I was 6 years old. She was, I think maybe in her 70s, from Poland. She didn't speak English, very broken English, even all these years being here. She came to the United States when she was 22 years old with her sister and met my grandfather, got married, had 2 children, one of them being my father. And when my grandfather died, my grandmother came to live with us, and she lived with us until she was 90. And no one knows her story. Like and she came from a very poor family, a very, very poor farming family. There's a few pictures of that. And so how did she get here? Where did she go? And then what was it like when she got here? No one knows those stories. And it's sad. And, unfortunately, when I was younger, didn't think of the importance of those stories. And I wish she was still here so that I could meet with her to understand what was it like as a 21-year-old girl to get on a boat and go clear across, the Atlantic to come to the United States to start a new life. What was that like? No one knows. So as I passed it on to Phil, I just want to leave with you, don't leave this earth as an empty dish, but a shade tree. Become a shade tree that somebody can sit under and know more about you.
I'm Phil Rischall. My name of my company is Family Care Consulting. I started my company 6 years ago. And basically how I started it was I had my parents who had passed away over 10 years ago. They lived into their 90s. I had 2 teenagers. I had a career. I had a wife. And I always joke about how I got gray, and it was my parents. Typical visit on a Saturday afternoon with 2 kids in tow, and I would drive into the driveway, and my father would be at the door, and he would have his insurance bills in his hands. He'd have the car taxes in his hands. He'd have all these. I'd come in, and he'd go, "Hi, should I pay this now? What should I do with this? Da 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 da." And I go, "Slow down, Dad. Say hello. Say hi to the grandkids." But in his mind, these were important documents, and he didn't know what to do. And he just felt he had to ask somebody, and it wasn't. It was me. And I started my company really in his memory. Or actually, the real truth is my 21-year-old daughter kind of looked at me as I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do in my next stage of life. And she said, look at all you did for the grandparents. And all the organizational things, not what Regina did, but mine was more of the paperwork. So what my company does, and it's me, myself, and I, 3 employees, I come in and the cognitive piece sometimes is missing, or even baby boomers are my clients. So many things come in the mail every day, and people just don't know what to do with them. I come in and I pay the bills. I'll work with budgets. I'll reconcile checkbooks. I'll do anything it takes. 89% of seniors want to stay in their own home, according to AARP. And so let's keep seniors in their homes. And part of what I can do is help. And while I'm there, it's not just the paperwork that I do, but a lot of times I make referrals to the people just in this table. And I've worked with a number of them that try to help the people. I came into a senior's home at one time, and he was in a mess. He was 90, his wife was in her 80s, they each had separate checkbooks, and he says, I don't understand, why am I paying all this interest? What happened? Why am I paying Sears on my charge card? And I looked at his charge card bill, and I see a check made out to CL&P, I see it to the phone company, and I said, well, what happened here? And he said, well, the bank sent me more checks. So I knew I was getting low with checks. Wasn't it great? The bank sent me checks. So I wrote out the checks. Well, every time he wrote a check, Sears charged him 29.5% interest for each one of those amounts. And that's what can happen. It's just amazing. I had another senior that I went into, and the bill was $10 that she forgot to pay. And Citibank wanted to charge her like a $15 late charge fee. So she says, well, I was late, there's nothing I can do. And I says, oh, no, there is something we can do. And I got on the phone, and it took me a little, I'm an advocate for them, and I got my way. Another thing with people's cell phones. I had a client that I saw her little flip phone sitting on the little, on the kitchen table as we were working, and I said to her, as I'm looking at the Verizon bill, I see she's being charged for internet. And I asked her, oh, how do you use your phone? And she says, well, I'm texting to my grandkids. I do look at the email. And I said, do you ever go online? And she looked at me like, no, I wouldn't know where to begin. And I said, do you know you're paying Verizon $30 a month on your Verizon bill, and it's for internet? And she looked at me and she said, I have no idea. She just paid the bill. And that's where I stepped in with her children's recommendation that I was there to help. In this particular case, I called Verizon. I wanted to get a year's credit. I felt that's $30, that's $360, and one of my goals when I work with my clients is if I can save them more money than they paid me, I really scored. And in this particular client, she said, oh, you won't make any progress. I'm sure, I didn't know what I was doing. I just signed up for the phone contract. Well, I did get 6 months credit. And $180 is $180 when I convinced them that she hadn't used it. So that's another story. And I become a great advocate. I had a client that I worked with, she was in her 90s, and she had a live-in that was at the house. And through the year, we spent, it was almost $7,000 a month. And 12 months, it was like $84,000 to pay for her live-in to be in the home through an agency. And I looked at her and I said, well, we should be able to get something back from the accountant when we do your taxes. And she goes, oh, really? She says, I've used this before, and I was new to this client, she says, and I've given him all my care bills, and he's never given me a deduction for it, because she was cognitively very sharp. And sure enough, he does the taxes, and he takes no allotment or no deduction for that. I call him up, and he says, oh, you can't do that. I said, yes, I can. And then he started reading all these regulations, and he said, oh, well, is there a nurse in the house? No, there's no nurse. There's a live-in who is like a companion home care aide. And then I hung up and I said, okay, I got to get my ducks in a row, use our group, have to get my ammunition in order. So I called some accountants that I know. I called some owners of agencies that I know, and they said, most definitely. So I called the accountant back, and my client is looking at me like, you're going to call him back? And I go, yes. So got him on the phone. I explained to him that I know that this has been used and other people have taken the deduction, and I feel very strongly about, I would like you to look into this. So he starts quoting me more regulations, and then he comes up to the one point, oh, would the doctor give a prescription? And I go, yes, the woman is arthritic, she can barely see, and she needs a live-in. Oh, in that case, I'll take it. I got her a $7,700 tax refund that year. And that's my biggest score I've ever done. And the excitement is, when this year's 2013 just got done, he never questioned it, and she got almost that amount again. So that's what I do. I'm an advocate. But at the same time, you got to be careful who's in your house. I know I lived in the area for over 30 years. I'm a former banker. I am insured. I'm bonded. I've gone to my police department. I actually have something that states I have no police record, because any of us can become so susceptible about who walks into your house. And that's where I have recommendations from attorneys. I have recommendations from, I don't like to give my clients out as recommendations because I think it's very, it's just too much for them. But their kids have been references for me, so I can certainly do that. But one thing I also can do for people is I come up with a binder and I put all your important documents in this binder. Neil, the attorney, will talk about some of these documents, but it's very important to you have everything in one place, and especially for family members to know. I'm a big advocate of recommending a safe to be purchased and put this binder inside the safe. And then there's a tab for everything, whether it be the power of attorneys, whether it be your wills, your trusts, a med list, which Sharon can talk about. Everything can go in there so it's in one place, and then your family members will know. But the other thing that I get involved with is I can become power of attorney, and I am for a number of my clients. There are some clients that just the mail comes to my post office box in my hometown, and I go get their mail. I report to their kids what happens. And in this one particular case, she was a memory care person, and she could not handle her mail. But getting back to the power of attorney, of lately, I have become successor power of attorney. And what I've learned that is, and Neil can talk about it a little bit more in his attorney talk, but what, is if you have a power of attorney, you may be married, your spouse is your power of attorney. And then you may have your son in California, or you may have, but sometimes you just don't have anybody. Sharon and I have a client that there's two sisters, and one of them, she's power of attorney for, and they both unmarried, don't have any family, and I am her successor power of attorney. So in case something happens to her sister, I can take over. If it's an orthopedic event, I meet with them twice a year. I look at the financial records. I know what's happening in her life. So if something did happen to her sister and her sister did pass away or was incapacitated in some manner, I can step in. All done by the attorneys, all set up in legal documents. So that's kind of something I've been telling people about. The other thing that I do, are a big advocate of, people have this, they get really nervous when it comes time to give up the car. And that was probably the biggest problem I have with my own father. But I've developed a system that has worked with a couple of my clients, and I like to share it. I tell people, if it comes to a certain point, you can't drive. It's difficult. So what I recommend to people is selling their car. And they'll go, well, how do I sell it? I always say, call your mechanic. I know in our particular case, when my mother sold her car, it was 8 years old and at 7,500 miles. The mechanic couldn't wait to get his hands on the car. But I've done that for a couple of my clients now. I've learned that. But what I do is I recommend to my clients, take the money from the sale of the car, make a separate account. Could be a checking account, a savings account. Put your money from the sale of the car in that account. Also, the gas. This particular client I had, every month she was getting gas. We put the amount of money in the account every month. We then took the tax bill that would normally pay once a year. We took that money, put it in the account. We looked at her maintenance bills for the past year. The bottom line is we all of a sudden had an account with money in it. Then what we did is There's two ways of doing it. One, there's an organization called ITM, Independent Transportation Network. I believe they're around here, but you can call them and they'll pick you up and take you to different places that you go. There's a pickup charge and it's a per mileage charge, and other seniors actually could drive. But in this particular client that I'm working up to and talking about, I said, why don't you get an aide? At $20 per hour, the aide came to the house, picked her up, and she put all her errands together. She went grocery shopping. The aide helped her bring the groceries in, and she really did it maybe once or twice a week. And she finally admitted to me, you know what? I'm relieved. I don't have to drive. I have somebody who's in the grocery store, and I'm tired, and my cane wasn't taking me as quick as I was. So there's different ways of making that system work. So I know the freedom of giving up your car sometimes is, oh my God, how can I do this? But there are ways, and the time you get done for the money you're doing to support your car, you know what? You're paying the same money, and you got safety. Your kids worry about you. Do them a favor. Don't drive. Same thing in the winter. Winter comes, don't go out. It's snowing. There's no need. Wait another day or two. Other thing is Peapod grocery delivery. That's something I can do for clients or some of your kids or family members. They go on the computer. They can do a whole list of groceries, have groceries delivered to you. But when it's bad weather, don't put yourself in. I'll just talk about one of the little things as I give a safety tip before I turn it over. For those of you that have washers and dryers in your basements, I'm always concerned about accidents and staircases going down. My aunt actually taught me this. I thought it was ingenious. She put her dirty laundry in a pillowcase or a duffel bag, and she'd take the bag at the top of the stairs, throw it downstairs, go down, she'd then sort it out, do it, and then going back up the stairs, especially the duffel bag that's got the string, she'd put her clothes in there, pull it up the stairs. It's just so much safer. Anybody that walks with a basket, I don't care what age they are, and going to go downstairs, and you never know if you're going to miss a step because you have that laundry basket in front of you. So I try to recommend, because safety is the most important thing. And the other thing, speaking of safety, I'm a big advocate of Lifeline. People say, oh, I don't need it. You know what? It's amazing what that Lifeline could do. I had a client that actually fell. She got back up, but Lifeline knew that she was on the ground. They could tell that she had fallen. It's amazing what the technology can do. So this person's son got a phone call. The son calls the mom. Are you okay? You just fell. How do you know I just fell? Well, that's the technology. And you know what? It's not a whole lot of money, but it is a safety. And I know my brother's in his 60s. He had some health conditions. He's single. I made him get one, and he wears it. And I'm, very, very happy he's done that. But
He's got a poodle.
he does. He's got that too. But you know what? The poodle can't call 911 in the event of an emergency. But my bottom line is to keep you safe, whether it be your documents, whether it be your paperwork, whether it be people coming into your homes, whatever. And I'll kind of end up here, and I'll turn it over to Neil, who has his own little.
Thanks, Phil. It's amazing if you're smart about it. That's the best key to staying home, which is what most people want to do. So it's good to have some thoughts about keeping care in place. My name's Neil Kraner. I am an elder law attorney. My practice is in Avon, Kraner and Hess, and I have one partner. We restrict our practice just to doing estate planning and working with seniors on issues of long-term care. So my office is in Avon. I live in Granby. I think I drive by this building twice a day, and it's good to be here with you. I've been doing this about 20 years. So for me, the part of getting your ducks in a row is really twofold. Everybody should first make sure they have good legal documents in place. And then the second part is then, once you have that, well, what should we do planning-wise in the event that the costs of long-term care come around? How do you save the farm in the event that you want to have home care services in place at home, or if you want to move to assisted living? And what kind of planning should we do to make sure that you can keep as many options open as possible? So that's the part of our practice, in addition to the documents, that makes us an elder law firm. And so the first part is your documents. And a lot of people think, oh, well, I have my will, so I'm all set. Well, everybody should have a will. That's great. But to me, that says what happens to your estate after you die. Almost more important is to have those documents in place that will allow your affairs to be dealt with during your lifetime. So in addition to your will, all of us should have a power of attorney and a healthcare power of attorney and a living will. And those are all documents that you can put in place to empower somebody else to handle your affairs during your lifetime. And none of those cross over to be after your death. They're all so that somebody can handle your affairs with you during your lifetime. If you don't have those things, if you did not have a power of attorney, for example, and then you got sick and you're incapacitated in some way, the only way somebody could take care of your business would be go to the probate court and establish a conservatorship. And that's sometimes there's a time and place for that, but it's something most people would sooner avoid if they could. So you do it privately. You can create a document that gives somebody the authority to handle your affairs. So a power of attorney is that. You can appoint some person or some combination of people so that they have authority over your financial affairs or your healthcare decisions. And I divide the two into separate documents, and they don't always wind up being that way. You might have gone to a lawyer that combined them all together, but I do them separately. I think they get used different places and for different reasons, so it's good to have them separate. The financial power of attorney is just that. Somebody else could handle your financial affairs. It does not take away your authority. You can establish the power of attorney and then stick it in your bottom drawer. But at least it's there until the time comes when somebody might need to use it. Now, you need to make sure that whoever you appoint knows where it is. If you're not going to give it to them directly, they at least need to have access to it. I'm not a big fan of using your safe deposit box at the bank to hold those documents, because if something happens and it's Saturday afternoon, then we're out of luck until Monday, and that's not always a good thing. So if you're not going to give the documents directly to the person you're appointing, they at least need to have good access to the documents. So the power of attorney is for financial stuff. The healthcare power of attorney is allowing somebody to make healthcare decisions. None of those documents are above you. If I give my wife or my son power of attorney, that doesn't mean that I don't have power anymore. I still do. I'm still calling the shots. If I'm at the doctor and my healthcare power of attorney is sitting there with me, I get to say what happens to me. The doctor will always get the informed consent from the patient. So you don't have to fear that somebody's going to start railroading you and making decisions against your wishes. You retain the right to revoke that thing at any time. And you should be the first point of decision-making in any event. If you're going to do a power of attorney, it's then a good idea to think about who you're going to give it to. I think you always should have more than one person. There should be a backup person. If you appoint your wife or your husband, maybe you want your friend or one of your children or some combination of them to be a backup. And then there's lots of different ways to set that up. You could have them all be co-equal or one at a time. But so there's quite a discussion that ought to be had about exactly, okay, if you want to do it now, what's the best way to set it up in your circumstances? Some people go to LegalZoom or other things online and they get the off-the-shelf form, and what you don't get is that conversation about tailoring something to fit your specific needs. So those are the two parts of the power of attorney. A healthcare power of attorney is not the same thing as a living will. A living will is a different document, and a lot of people think they have a living will, so they have a healthcare power of attorney too, but they're not the same. By law, a living will only comes into effect when your doctor says, that's it, we're at the end, there's no treatment that we're going to give this patient that's going to help them recover. Any treatment is only going to prolong the moment of their death. So we all have a choice at that moment. Do we want life support or not? And that's what a living will does. And because it's only activated in that moment, you need the healthcare power of attorney for between now and then. But the living will is important so that your wishes are in writing, and so if that moment ever arises, the burden is lifted off of your loved ones. They don't have to decide for you. They're just delivering your wishes to the doctors at that point. So those are the really essential documents to have in place for helping somebody to handle your affairs during your lifetime. Then again, we all need a will. A will says what happens to your money, your property, when you die. A trust is an alternative way of disposing your estate. We like trusts. Lawyers love trusts. I have 30 different kinds of trusts that I could do for you. But trusts are not necessary for everybody. They have particular uses. The main kind of trust that people hear a lot about is a living trust, and Susie Orman talks about those. She thinks everybody should have one. To me, they're necessary for some people, but not everyone. The main reason for doing a trust is to save your estate from paying estate taxes. Right now, the federal exemption against estate tax is $5.32 million. The first $5+ million is not subject to estate tax. So for most of us, we're good. State of Connecticut's not quite so generous. It's at $2 million per person. But still, for most of us, we're not worried about estate tax. If you have an estate that's more than that, we ought to be talking about trusts. If you don't, then maybe a simple plan with just wills is sufficient. I'm going to come back to questions later. Sorry. There are other reasons for doing trusts. We do special needs trusts. If you have a family member who's got a disability, a special needs trust is a great way to provide for them. We do insurance trusts and all kinds of other sorts of trusts. But those are more complex plans, and I'm an advocate for people keeping it simple when they can. Saying that, you ought to have a will in place and maybe a trust, and that's great. But then the next part of the conversation is, all right, well, that's all well and good if I happen to die before I spend all my money on long-term care. But what if you get sick and you wind up needing long-term care? Nursing homes these days cost almost $15,000 a month in this neck of the woods. So it doesn't take long to really blow a hole in the side of your planning boat if you wind up needing long-term care. It's very expensive. Assisted living is a better alternative for many people. It's a little less. You might be spending $6,000 or $8,000 a month on assisted living. And home care is great. We like to start with home care and keep people home because it's what people really want to do mostly. But even that can be expensive as you need more and more care. So it's important to plan for the cost of care. Maybe that's involves buying long-term care insurance. If you can't do that, then we do some budgeting about what the cost of care would be and how is your estate going to handle that. At some point, planning around the cost of care involves dealing with Title 19. And Title 19 is Medicaid, but we call it Title 19 because otherwise it's so confusing between Medicare and Medicaid. But it's the program that was started to help people pay for nursing homes. Now Connecticut has a very good Title 19 home care benefit, so if you qualify, you can get the VNA to come and provide services for you in your home, and those are paid for by Title 19. So we like to do what we can to arrange your estate so that you might qualify. And again, that's not for everybody, but it's sometimes a good thing to try to do. So, in the old days, that meant just giving all your assets to your kids as soon as you could. And a lot of people think that's what elder law attorneys are all about. And I think, that might be a strategy, but I'm all for preserving your choices and preserving your quality of life. And maybe it's better for you to spend your assets down and just, have the benefit of them yourself rather than to try to protect them for your kids. I think that's a necessary part of the conversation. We're going to come back for questions.
Can you?
Healthcare power attorney do?
Pardon?
A healthcare power attorney, what does he do?
So that healthcare power of attorney, we're going to do questions after we're all done, folks. But so the healthcare power of attorney, if you're incapacitated and you have an accident, you need to have your broken leg set, and the hospital says somebody's got to give permission for this treatment, then they would decide that. So they would be able to sign off on your treatment.
How about VA stuff?
So part of the planning around the cost of care would be to find alternative sources for paying for your care, and so Title 19 is one. Another important program for staying home, if you're a veteran or you're the surviving spouse of a veteran, okay, so there's a program that the VA has that's free money to help pay for home care
How many
services.
veterans here? How many veterans here?
So you would qualify if you were honorably discharged and you served at least sometime during wartime, and you have a need for home care services. There's what's called the aid and attendance pension, which is, can be up to almost $2,000 a month in free money to help pay for home care services for those who qualify. So we like to see if we can fit people into that program too as well. So it's an important planning process, not just to get your documents in place, but then to also then think about what else you should be doing. In terms of gifting, with Title 19, many people know that there's a 5-year look-back period. And so what that means is that if you make a gift and less than 5 years goes by after that gift, you're potentially ineligible for Title 19 because you have a gift that shows up in that look-back period. So if you're going to do gifting, we need to do it sooner than later so you can get the 5-year clock ticking. There's some exceptions to that rule. You can gift assets to a disabled son or daughter without disqualification. You can move assets between spouses. That's not a disqualifying event. If you have a son or daughter who lives with you and helps to keep you in the community, then you can transfer your house to that son or daughter as a caregiving child. So there's lots of ways that we can kind of move around the 5-year look-back period, but it's something that has to be thought about. And so the lesson is, the sooner you start the planning, the better. And maybe on that note, I will pass it to Nicole, and we'll come back for questions later.
Thank you, Neil. My name is Nicole Paquette. I'm a licensed funeral director, embalmer, and a certified pre-planning consultant, and I work with the Carmen Community Funeral Homes. Again, my specialty is pre-planning, and that's what I'd like to share with you this evening. You're all here this evening. Time is on your side. You have control of your decisions, moving forward, whether it be legal or, what other panel members have talked about. But I would also encourage you to consider pre-planning whatever your final wishes may be. Now, whenever I have an opportunity to speak like this, I am asked many questions about cremation, and many of you may be considering that, or you may know someone or have had that discussion. So I like to just kind of briefly talk about cremation. There's really 3 different types of cremation services. And the first one is what we call a traditional cremation, and the key word in that is traditional. I'm sure you're all aware of a traditional burial. And so likewise, there's a traditional cremation. This is where you would still have a wake or visitation, and the deceased person would be in a casket, and you can have that casket open for viewing. You can have a church service, you can have a service in the funeral home, but after the viewing or after the church service, that's when the cremation can occur. So again, you're still doing all the traditional parts of a service, but the cremation would ultimately occur after that. The second cremation service type is what's called a memorial cremation. And this is the cremation where there would be no viewing of the person's body. We would arrange for the cremation first, and then there would be an appropriate memorial service after that. In the memorial service, the cremated remains can be present in an urn, and sometimes families will not ask for the urn to be present. They may have a memorial table. So again, no viewing with a memorial cremation, but there is some kind of an acknowledgement. There is a service. And then the family can choose burial, or sometimes families are choosing scattering or keeping the cremated remains at home. The last type of cremation service that others are choosing is what we in the funeral home industry refer to as a direct cremation. And when you ask a funeral home to provide a direct cremation, what you're asking for is cremation only. No wake, no services, at least not from the funeral home. You may do something privately on your own, but you just want the funeral home to handle the cremation part. Now, a few other things about cremation that I always like to share. A cremation cannot be performed within 48 hours after death. So people will say to me, just pick up my body and cremate me. Well, that doesn't happen. We have to wait 48 hours, and again, that's according to the laws here in Connecticut. Also, what's required is notification to the medical examiner's office. If you're choosing cremation, and when you pass away, the funeral home must notify the medical examiner's office. And the medical examiner is required to do an inquiry. And that's just an investigation to make sure that you did not pass away from unnatural causes. If you've cremated someone and someone comes out later and says, gee, I think there was foul play involved, your body's gone. So it's a one chance, so that's why it's required by the medical examiner. And the funeral home arranges with the medical examiner for that inquiry. Also, with cremation, you're not required to be embalmed. You may find that the funeral home requires embalming if there's viewing, but just for the cremation process itself, embalming is not required. And also the purchase of a casket is not required for cremation. So just to back up a little, when I was mentioning the first cremation service type, the traditional cremation, and that one could have a wake with a viewing, many funeral homes offer a ceremonial casket that you can rent. So that's, many families opt to do that rather than buying a casket. They may rent a casket with the funeral home, and then the cremation would take place after. But if you were choosing the memorial cremation or the direct cremation, you would not need to purchase a casket. You would find yourself required to purchase something called an alternative container, and this would be a requirement of the crematory, not the funeral home, but the crematory itself, and they require that the person's body be encased in some kind of a rigid container. And this is just for the safety and the handling of, getting to the crematory and placing the person's remains in what's called the retort, which is where the cremation occurs. So that's just a few things involved with cremation. Now, I sit with many families at Carmen Funeral Home who want to get things in order, and you have it within your control to do that. When I sit with people, I ask information about them. I record that. Demographic and vital statistic information, name, date of birth, place of birth, parents' names, veteran information, Social Security number. The funeral home is responsible to notify the Social Security Administration when a person passes away, so that's information you need to provide to the funeral director. But then I record, what are your wishes? Are you considering one of the cremation service types? Are you considering traditional burial? If you are choosing traditional burial, perhaps you'd like to choose your casket ahead of time. And many of you likely have cemetery plots already purchased. If you don't, and you're considering burial, I also recommend contacting the cemetery to arrange for purchasing the graves ahead of time. The more you do ahead of time, the less someone else will have to do for you at a very difficult and stressful time. At Carmen Funeral Home, we have two distinctions we'll call wishes only. And this is when I meet with someone and I'm recording the information, I'm recording what they'd like for services, and some people will go as very far as to detail perhaps what readings of scripture they might like, what music they might like as part of their services. They may pick out, aside from a casket or urn or vault, their prayer cards. And I understand this because we all know that death is not a comfortable topic to talk about. And many people tell me, I haven't been able to speak to my children because they don't want to hear it. Or there's times people where they don't have children, and again, they're not able to express their wishes to someone they may feel would be their survivor. You can always record your wishes with the funeral home. There's not a charge for meeting. I can speak for Carmen Funeral Home. We do not charge for meeting with families. And again, wishes only, just information. I always do provide a cost estimate for people to take home because one of the number one questions is, how much is this going to cost? So I can give people an idea according to today's prices, certainly. Now, prepayment of that funeral or cremation is an option. And if you prepay a funeral home in Connecticut, they're required to turn over 100% of what you give to them to a third party or an escrow agent. That funeral home will not keep a penny of your money. And the reason behind this is if something happened to the funeral home, that your money is safe because it's with a third party. If you consider prepayment, I would say, well, what's in it for you? Will the funeral home provide a guarantee for what they do? Will they guarantee the cost of the services and merchandise that they will offer at some point in the future? I meet with many people who come in to prepay because they're in a spend-down mode for Title 19, which Neil had spoken about earlier. So they're trying to liquidate their assets in order to qualify for eligibility into the program. And the state of Connecticut does allow 2 types of trusts that you would set up through the funeral home. So I meet with many, many people who are in that spend-down mode. And other people will come to me because they'll say, you know, we buried someone in the family. The death was sudden, and they want to prevent for their survivors, whether it be their children or other relatives or even friends. Sometimes we've outlived our family, but they want to prevent someone else from having that burden. So you certainly have it in your control to reduce an emotional burden. You have it in your control to reduce a financial burden as well. That really summarizes kind of just a 10-minute overview, and as Neil said, we'll be taking questions in the end, but my bottom line for you is reach out to a licensed, reputable funeral home. There are many who are members of the Connecticut Funeral Directors Association. I would recommend choosing a firm. Make an appointment. Don't necessarily plan on prepaying on the spot. Go in, get the information, bring someone with you. It's always nice to have another set of eyes and ears. And but you can begin that pre-planning process. Again, the more you do, the less someone else will have to at the time. Thank you.
Well, I always say that Nicole really should be last since she's the last person you'll see in your life. I don't have a cold, I have allergies, just to let you know. It sounds like a few more people here have the same thing. So my name is Sharon Gauthier, and I'm a registered nurse. Most of my career has been in the emergency department. I used to manage the emergency department at Hartford Hospital and was a case manager. And about 10 years ago decided it would be great, just around the time my husband retired, for me to go into business. And the reason I did that and developed a patient advocacy business is I felt at the time, and at the time it was a new concept, that would be great for people to have access to someone who really wasn't part of the system, that could advocate for you and be your voice when there was a time that you needed that. So the company started, and although it was my thought that we wouldn't be just supporting elderly, our population is elderly. We certainly will take any age group, but the biggest need is the elderly population. And it evolved 7 years later into 28 nurses, 3 offices, and we cover the state of Connecticut. Excuse me. A bit of what we do is pull together a team for people for all the things that we don't do. And I can say with confidence that I've used everyone at this table at a time that I've needed them. That's been part of that team. So our service is before you're a patient, during your being a patient, and after you're a patient. So although the term is patient advocate, we really have the ability, because we are all licensed clinicians, to be able to meet with you and identify pretty quickly what kind of coordination you need. And it may be medical management. Most of the time, it's medical management that's keeping you from being able to coordinate the rest of your life well enough, that's frustrating you. And I'll give you a quick example. As we've talked about tonight, all of our lives evolve around a story. We are involved with lots of people throughout the year, and they all have a story. Some of them are good, some of them aren't good, and hopefully we kind of make their journey, whatever it is, a little bit better. So recently, in the last 3 months, I received a call from a daughter, the only daughter, who lives in New York, and her parents live in New Hartford. And New Hartford's way out in the boonies. And they live on a beautiful lake, beautiful house. And 10 years ago, they both thought that was a great idea. But in 10 years, they're now in their 80s, and she's had medical problems. He had 3 TIAs. Does anybody know what a TIA is? Have you had one? Transient ischemic attack. So those are like mini strokes. They look like a stroke, they act like a stroke. Most of the time, you don't have any residuals, meaning that you'll go to the hospital, you look like you might not be able to move one side or the other. In a couple of days, it kind of resolves. And the reason for that is that whatever occluded your vessel, whatever stopped your vessel from getting the blood flow it needed, passed through. Could have been a big chunk of turkey, could have been a big, that you got cholesterol from, something that broke off from your vessel that stopped that vessel from getting all of that blood flow. And most of the time you leave the hospital and you have all your faculties. This particular gentleman, who had been an athlete his whole life, like a national athlete, she was a beautiful model in Italy. He did everything for her. She didn't know how to write a check. She never managed the money. And he now couldn't even read a book or do his bills. And that was frustrating him, because what was attacked during the time that he had these smaller strokes was what they call the executive function of his brain. So he no longer had the ability to be able to look at a bill and look at a checkbook and be able to write that check out. So although I was brought in by the daughter, who was frustrated with the decline of her father around a medical issue, the more important issue for them at that time wasn't medical. It was, I need to pay my bills and I don't even know how much money I have, and we're going to be selling our house. So I was able to collaborate with another partner I have, who is able to deal with real estate, get their funding together and manage all that. And then 3 weeks later, he had another stroke. So although I was brought in for one thing, I connected them, which again, my job, as everyone's job at this table is to fend out to referrals of people that we know and trust to help you stay at home in the best quality of life that you can. So at that moment, it was the financial piece, and they wanted to sell their house. 3 weeks later, he ends up in a small community hospital. I get called. We're actually 24/7, our service. I get called in. I get him transferred to a larger hospital, Hartford Hospital. He gets a complete workup. It's which he had never had in the past for whatever reason. And we find that he's in better shape than he thinks he is, but it has affected his brain. So functionally, he looked great. Big, tall, handsome gentleman. He was a, what's the thing with the sword? He was a fencing champion, a national fencing champion, international fencing champion. And, but he cognitively, meaning his ability to read and understand things, was impacted. So I was able to help them on several different levels. And we finally got to the medical management piece of it, where now I organized all of his care in one hospital, was able to get him thoroughly examined with a neuropsychologist who was able to identify with him what the issues were and help him manage that better. So we started before, we ended up during, and I continue after, because now they're moving and they're going to need someone to oversee their care as that emergency contact, because the daughter lives in New York and she doesn't want to be worried anymore. And so I'm always there to be called in whenever there's an event, which there will be. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. We prevent the events from happening because we're all registered nurses. We don't do what the VNA does. So I work very well with the VNAs, so that when I have a client that I think might need therapy, which he did, he wanted to swim, so I had to find for him, well, where can he get swimming therapy? So I have access to multiple resources that I could then connect him to that, and did. And so we're not the nurses that come in and take the blood pressure and manage the wounds, because the visiting nurses associations that are out there manage a crisis that happens in the hospital that allows you to access your benefit from Medicare to go home, with nursing that comes in to manage you until you're back to what your normal state is, and then they're out. We come in and we organize all that for you. So we know the good agencies. We've got relationships with them. I've used Neil on several occasions where I've had clients come to me with issues legally that I can't answer. And having a living will is another discussion that he and I have had many times. I recently got a call from a daughter whose father was in a motor vehicle accident, and the father was divorced, and the daughter was the only child, and he ended up in Lawrence Memorial Hospital. So she called me in a panic and said, I need to get power of attorney of my dad. Well, where is your dad? Well, he's in the ICU and he's on a ventilator. Well, you know what? That's the wrong time to get power of attorney, which she didn't understand, and a lot of people don't. So I very nicely listened to her for a while, because I wasn't going to ambush her with you can't. And I just said, it's very difficult to get power of attorney now because he has to agree to it. And that's the difference between conservatorship and power of attorney. You have to be cognitively intact to sit there and say, yes, I want my daughter to be there to sign for things for me and manage my money and my affairs when I can't. So what I was able to do was meet with her, get a comfort level of the care he was getting, which actually was very poor, get him to an assisted living that was appropriate for him to be able to get the therapy that he needed. He ended up falling the first night because they sent him too early. He then went back to the hospital, who then put him under observation. Anybody know about observation and admission? Have you all heard about that? Well, here's what's happened with Medicare. For years, the hospitals have taken you in as a patient and taken care of you, and then 3 days later they discharge you, and then you go home, and a week later you're back with the same issue. And the hospitals really didn't care because they were getting paid for it. Was it the right thing to do? Not necessarily, but they're getting paid for it. Anybody on any boards of hospitals here before I I'm great in putting my foot in my mouth. But I speak the truth, having been deeply involved with systems. So what happened was Medicare came back to the hospitals and the VNAs and the doctors and said to everyone, and the convalescent homes, if Mr. Smith leaves the hospital with this issue, and in less than 30 days they return with the same issue, we are not going to pay anybody, including the physician, including the convalescent home, including everyone. Now, it's not every person that comes back, but it's a percentage that comes back. So now the hospitals care because it's hit their pocketbooks. So now they've developed programs, and one of the things that they've started stepping into is, instead of admitting you, they put you under observation. Huge increase in observation in the last year since this bill was initiated. So now what happens is you come in the hospital, you think you're admitted, you go to the floor, and 2 or 3 days later, they say, well, you're ready for rehab, but you're going to have to pay for it yourself because you didn't get your 3-day qualifying stay for Medicare to pay for you. And your family looks at them and says, what? And they'll say, well, you were under observation. The hospitals will say, oh, well, we told and discussed this with the family, and they haven't. So it's been utilized to kind of help fend off those problems that they might get. It's also been extended somewhat on Medicare's part. So I get involved with those decisions. And this particular gentleman who left the hospital too early to go to rehab came back, and they then put him under observation. So the daughter calls me in a panic, and I wasn't going to get into it with the hospital, but he was a veteran. This is an election year, right? So I got on the phone, and I called a senator, and I called the legislator in their area. And I called Joe Courtney, who happens to be a VA or a veteran supporter, and I told them the story. And within a day, she had a call from the governor's house, the senator's office, and Joe Courtney's office. And now the decisions about that is on between him and the hospital, and that will probably end up being reversed because it wasn't appropriate for him. My feeling was that he came back because he left too early, and for them to now put him under observation wasn't good. And the convalescent home is saying to her, well, if he comes back, he needs 24-hour care. Well, if he needs a 24-hour home health aide, guess what? He's not ready to leave the hospital. So we advocate on several levels for people. We are privately paid. We do not accept insurances. We're now trying to get data from our systems to be able to tell insurance companies we save a lot of money because we redirect you to your physicians who should be managing you rather than send you to the ER. We're 24/7, which no one has access to a registered nurse who's seasoned 24 hours a day. And we will keep people in their homes if it's appropriate. And there are times when it's not. We'll also do geriatric assessments, so we help families decide whether or not grandma is appropriate to be home and should we get conservatorship of them, which is when I pull in Neil. And I've used every service at this table, including the funeral home, when I had someone who died very quickly, unexpectedly, called them and they took care of everything. Neil has used our services to provide geriatric assessments so they have a clearer idea. We're all in this to help you be independent. But I can tell each and every one of you that not one of you is going to go to your family and say, you know what, I think I'm really having a problem and I need help. I never get a call from an 85-year-old who says they need us. So my advice to all of you is do not resist the help that your children are trying to give you. Unless you are a billionaire and you think that they're really just after your money, which chances are that isn't the case. If you have a family member that is stating to you that there are concerns, even though you may not have the ability to understand that, I think you need to listen to that before there is a crisis. We are involved in multiple crises that happen with frustrated families who have sat back and said, I knew my mother and father couldn't drive, but we could not take their license away from them. Well, you know what I did with my mother in Florida? I put one of those things on the wheel. She insisted that the reason why she didn't get her license is because she came from Canada. Now, mind you, she'd been in the States for years. But at 88, she was deaf, and she had problems with her vision and some dementia, and they would not give her license again because they actually retest you in Florida where they don't in Connecticut. So I went down and I put one of those bars on. She immediately called my brother. I don't know what's wrong with the car. I need like this key to unlock this bar. Mom, you can't drive. Well, who said I can't drive? Your doctor said you can't drive. It was a struggle to get her not on the road. Being an ER nurse, I can tell you I've been on the other end of it, where I've seen people like yourselves who come in and there's nothing wrong with them, but now they've really seriously hurt another family. So although driving is the ultimate of independence, it's also the ultimate problem that can get you into the most trouble. So we are the only patient advocacy company in Connecticut. We're run strictly by registered nurses who are seasoned with 20 years plus experience. And we come in as your advocate on all levels to be able to assess and help you make the right decisions and stay independent. And I just wanted to thank Tracy for coming, because what Tracy's company does at no charge is she will bring you to those wonderful communities that are out there that you can pay a flat fee for and not worry about anything. They are communal, and not everyone's ready for a communal living. But for those of you who are considering that, utilize the resources that are out there to start looking around rather than staying at home for another winter. Was winter tough for everybody last year? For not mowing the grass, but plowing the snow and, no mowing of the grass. And it was hard. And, you know, we had a lot of difficulty getting our clients out last year because everyone's at risk of fall. I tell you, if you're 60 years or older, when you go in the hospital, you're going to be a fall risk, and you're going to have that alarm on your bed when you get up. And you're going to get up and say, what is that noise? So we encourage you all to be proactive. So thank you.
People have questions.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.